All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of the Manly Hoops podcast. If you've been enjoying our content, please make sure to like and subscribe. We appreciate all your support. We've got a good one here, NC State at Auburn. I'm going to pass it over to Marcus. Here's initial thoughts on this matchup.
Yeah, I mean, both teams coming off of 3-game weeks last week. NC State made the trip to Maui, which obviously doesn't have the same sort of punch that it's had in years past due to the players' era where Auburn was. Auburn went 2-1 out there. NC State 1-2 with some pretty lackluster defensive performances. Obviously, like this, Will Wade typically has a pretty solid defense, and there were some defenders that individually anyway that have a track record of being good defenders coming into this season, but they gave up 102 to Texas out there, 85 to Seton Hall. Texas most notably, like that game, Texas was granted, like Maui skews things a little bit because the rims are so friendly and all that. But, even still, Texas was generating fantastic looks just about every possession down the floor. They were getting to the rim, which is another thing. Like this NC State team just they don't really have any rim protection, right? They have one guy with a block rate over 4.7%, and it's Arsenault, who's playing 21.7% of the minutes. So there's just no true rim protection. They're kind of struggling to contain the ball. Teams are getting kind of whatever they want up to this point in the season, which has led to them being 106th in adjusted defensive efficiency. They've fortunately shot the three ball very well. They're 7th in the country in 3-point rate or 3-point percentage. But now they're facing an Auburn team that they got Keyshawn Hall back. You've got Pettiford, who's finally started to make some shots. He was really struggling, but then last week went 24, 16, 27 across 3 games and shot it over 50% in 2 of the 3. And the other one was against Michigan, who's arguably the best defense in the country right now. So, they've got their work cut out for them. If that wasn't enough, like Auburn's 13th in offensive rebound rate, which, they're obviously always really good on the offensive glass, and this is no different. So, NC State's defense does have their work cut out for them, but on the offensive end, they do have avenues with Auburn's willingness to give up the 3 ball, and as efficient as NC State has been from behind the arc up to this point, that's certainly an avenue that they can generate some points against this Auburn defense.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we could be seeing kind of a shootout here where the points kind of rack up for both teams. But Cody, let's hear your thoughts on this matchup.
Yeah, I mean, definitely 2 defenses that have taken a step back after the start of the season. I attributed a lot of the defensive failures of NC State due to Maui. I do think this defense is a lot better than where they sit right now in analytical projections. But, they didn't look great on the defensive end. They kind of got diced at the rim. Seton Hall kind of had their way for stretches in that game. And that's not an offense that many people think all that highly of. I think they're definitely a lot better than people imagine them to be this season. But ultimately, they shouldn't be getting diced at the rim as much as they were in Texas, putting up 102, I think, regardless of the arena, isn't that great of a performance. And, I think NC State's lack of size is coming to the forefront a little bit right now. They deny the rim at a high rate. They try to keep you out of the paint. They kind of switch everything, switching on and off ball actions, taking you out of your pick and roll game, which I think is a good thing here against Auburn that really likes to get into their pick and roll actions with Tahaad, Pettiford, and a little bit with Keyshawn Hall. They're very heavy isolation forcing as well. And they'll also collapse their defense once somebody gets in the lane for Auburn and kind of force one of these other guys to beat them. And, that's kind of my question mark with Auburn right now is with the off-ball shooting. It's been a lot of Tahaad, Pettiford, and Keyshawn Hall taking a large volume of the shots. I mean, they've taken over. I mean, Pettiford's taken 30.9% of shots while he's on the floor. Keyshawn Hall has taken 24.3% of shots. Outside of that, there's only one guy that's over 20% in this area, and that's Keyshawn Murphy up front. And I think he might have a tough time against this rim denial defense, and he's not a guy that's like, I don't think he's going to overwhelm this NC State team with size. So I don't think this is a terrible spot for the NC State defense to kind of get right. But, I think Auburn's athleticism on the perimeter and just across the roster could give NC State somewhat of a tough time on the offensive end. Like, they've been running extremely hot shooting wise. They're 7th nationally in 3-point percentage at 42%. And there's a lot of guys that are shooting like well over their career averages, like with Darrion Williams, he's shooting 54%. But Paul McNeil, he's shooting it really well. And I am a believer that he can shoot it close to 40% for the entire season. He's very talented. Quadir Copeland is 6 for 11 from 3. I know we're not going to get a lot of volume there, but he's been a guy that's not going to shoot it at a high clip throughout this whole season. But they do have good shooters at their disposal. I do think they're going to somewhat regress at some point, and I think Auburn's defense has enough length and athleticism to bother them. So, it's a game that I've kind of been back and forth on, at least leading up to it, these last couple days. So, but it's definitely going to be an interesting game to tune in for, because there are, like, both of these teams are really trying to improve in multiple areas.
Absolutely. All right, Marcus, what does NC State have to do to pull off a win here at Auburn?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is, keeping Auburn off the offensive glass. That's an area where obviously Auburn has had a lot of success. And, while NC State has been pretty solid on the defensive glass, they're in the top 100. This is an Auburn team that has a lot of athleticism, right? And Keyshawn Murphy is as good an offensive rebounder as there is, right? I don't know what his rate is so far this year. It's actually lower than it's been in years past. But he just creates so many extra plays just with his athleticism, the way he plays, physicality wise. So I think it's going to be really important for them to limit second chances for this Auburn offense, and then also on the defensive end, defend without fouling. Right, they've been really poor here, 334th nationally in free throw rate defense, and this is an Auburn team that gets to the line at a pretty high clip. Right, they're 50th in free throw rate on the offensive end. They really got to try and cut down on that. I think a lot of the issues for NC State have been on the defensive end. Obviously, they got to continue to make shots. But I expect some sort of regression back to what they'll probably be for the entire season. They're not going to shoot it at 42% for the entire year. But it's going to be really important on the defensive end to just force them into one and dones, defend without fouling, and then this is an Auburn team that doesn't really they play in a lot of ISO. Right, they don't really generate a lot of shots, off creation, for others. Right, like Pettiford and Keyshawn Hall in particular love to kind of just break you down and end up taking some sort of tough shot. The rim denial scheme of NC State does kind of set up sort of well for that, because those guys will occasionally kind of fall in love with going ISO and taking some of those mid-range tough shots. This Auburn offense only averages 14 assists a game for the season. They're not a team that's really looking to share the ball. And like you said, those two guys are taking a very high percentage of the shots. So, you have to imagine when the ball's in their hands, they're going to just look to go and score themselves. And with the rim denial scheme, I think it sets up decently well to keep this game at least close, right? It's never an easy place to go play at Auburn. So, it's really going to come down to those things. And then, I think taking care of the ball always, like Auburn, while the number isn't like eye popping, 90th in turnover rate defense, I think that, at Auburn, it's always a little bit of a tougher environment. So taking care of the ball is going to be really key in this matchup as well.
All right. Definitely some good points, Marcus. Cody, what does Auburn have to do to stop an NC State upset?
Yeah, I mean, Marcus mentioned like NC State needs to do a good job of keeping Auburn off the glass. I think this is where Auburn needs to to take advantage of a smaller NC State front line and get all over the offensive glass themselves. Guys like Keyshawn Murphy, Sebastian Williams-Adams, and if Philip Jovic is able to go, I know he's dealing with a wrist injury. He missed their last game, I believe. If he goes, I think he can take advantage of a smaller front line that NC State has. And Marcus mentioned some other things about this rim denial scheme of NC State. Kind of forcing these guys out on the perimeter. It's a defense that also forces like a ton of isolation, and that's Auburn just seems to kind of prefer to play out of it. NC State is in the 77th percentile in isolation frequency allowed. They are in the 80th percentile in defending in isolation because they do have a lot of really good switchable defenders. But if Auburn like prefers to play out of primary actions anyway, and NC State's going to force it, I think they're going to be completely okay with that. So guys like Tahaad Pettiford and Keyshawn Hall, who are the main isolation scorers on this Auburn offense, need to be efficient in order to avoid an upset here. And Pettiford's got it going a little bit more lately. He's not going to be able to work out a pick and roll as much because NC State's just kind of switching all that stuff. So, but I think Keyshawn Hall is going to be especially big in these isolation setups. He's a little bit bigger than every matchup that he's going to get. Like maybe they throw Darrion Williams at him. I think they can throw, like a Terrence Arsenault at him a little bit to bother him with some length. But Keyshawn Hall definitely has the size advantage in a lot of the matchups. So I do think he can have success. And, once Auburn gets into the lane off these isolation opportunities, obviously NC State is going to like collapse and really try to deny the rim and force, some catch and shoot from these Auburn secondary options, because they do force spot up in like, I believe it's like the 98th percentile or the 88th percentile, and they don't defend it at a super high level. They give up their share of unguarded threes. But, this has kind of been the concern for me with the Auburn offense is, where are the other options and where are the viable catch and shoot options? Like realistically, it should be Kevin Overton as the main guy. He's only 10 for 33 from three this year. Hasn't like completely put it together as a shooter throughout his entire career. He doesn't have a season where he shot over 35%. So I don't know if it's going to be him or not, but that's kind of his calling card is his catch and shoot ability. So he's going to have to be good in this game, and then Pettiford and Hall are going to have to be good in this area as well. When one guy doesn't have the ball, they're going to have to be good knocking down the three. And defensively, they're just going to have to run NC State off the 3-point line a little bit, use their athleticism to kind of swarm the rim, and find a way to harass these NC State guards a little bit. Auburn's they've gotten a little bit more aggressive defensively, particularly in the pick and roll game. It's not just drop coverage anymore because Janai Broom and Dylan Cardwell aren't here anymore as like elite rim deterrents. So they've gotten a little bit more aggressive with Keyshawn Murphy, being a little bit more versatile as a defender. He can defend in space a little bit more, but it's just not the same type of big. So Stephen Pearl's been a little bit more aggressive defensively. I'm not sure if that's going to be perfect for this matchup that has, NC State has a ton of off-ball shooting like we've mentioned, and they're going to be tough to guard in space. But I do think Auburn has enough athleticism to, at least maintain their scheme and have some success.
Some good points all the way around. Marcus, who do you have coming out of here with a win? Who's your pick?
Yeah, I think Auburn wins a tight one. I think this game does end up being a lot closer. I think NC State starts to find their way a little bit more on the defensive end, but I just have too many worries with them on limiting Auburn's second chance opportunities. I believe in the talents of Tahaad Pettiford and Keyshawn Hall at home. So I'm going to take Auburn. I think they win it by a bucket or two. I'll say they win by 3. We'll say 84-81.
All right, Cody, who do you like here?
Yeah, I think Auburn gets it done as well. I think their rebounding edge is going to, be the biggest deciding factor. I know they're not great on the defensive glass, but NC State isn't really the type of team that's going to, really expose them in that area. So, yeah, I do like Auburn here. I like for someone else to emerge outside of Pettiford and Hall in a big home game. And again, like this is one of the toughest places to play in the country at Neville Arena. So I do trust Auburn to get it done. I trust them to figure out some things defensively, and NC State's due for a little bit of 3-point shooting regression. So I'll take them to win this one. And I would have like probably a similar score. I'll say it's a little bit lower scoring. I'll say 79-75.
I like Auburn as well. I'm going for a high-scoring affair, though. I'm doing 91-86 Auburn.
Wow.
I really think it's going to be a shootout. But anything else you boys want to add?
No.
All good? All right. We're going to wrap things up here. As always, thank you for listening to the Manly Hoops podcast.